We're going to continue this morning talking about Jacob, who's a central figure in the gospel, really, because he's one of the descendants of Abraham, who God was going to use to bring Jesus Christ into the world eventually, and obviously his descendants. And so if you turn to Genesis chapter 27, I'm going to start there. And then what I'm going to do is, because there's way too much to read here, I'm going to give you a synopsis about the life of Jacob and from where we are starting here, and highlight a couple things I want you to see in how that, kind of what we're talking about this morning, how God, and the little experiences that you have personally with Him in your life, which were great examples this morning, and how God had that personal, or Jacob had that personal experience with God that helped him in his faith to keep moving forward, even when things looked really difficult and possibly dangerous. And we see this in Jacob's life, in the things that he went through, and how God, at the times when he needed it most, God appeared or did something for him that was, clearly from God, that would help him to take that step or to go forward in doing what God had called him to do. And I also want you to see that Jacob is the rightful heir. Now, it's interesting how you have a similar situation where you had Isaac and Ishmael. Ishmael was the firstborn of Abraham, but he wasn't the firstborn of the promise, because God had promised his firstborn would be through Sarah, through who which the blessing and through which the promises that God had promised would go through. Okay. Here we have, now Isaac has had his children. He went and he found Rebekah and brought her back, and he had Rebekah had Jacob and Esau. They were twins, and Esau was technically the firstborn, and because he came out first. And so we see there where Jacob is grabbing onto his heel as they come out, and kind of fighting already before they get out of the womb. But that's how siblings are sometimes. But we see here, we talked last week about how Jacob and Esau, their personalities, their priorities, what was important to them, how that Jacob tended to be more spiritually sensitive, and Esau was more interested in going out and hunting. He was more interested in the things of the world. And there's nothing wrong with hunting, just in case you were wondering about that, but there's nothing wrong with hunting. The problem with Esau was that his mind wasn't on the things of God. It could be hunting, it could be shopping. Christmas time, right? Yes. We have almost all our Christmas shopping done. Wow. That is a miracle. Because usually on December 24th, we're like, what are we going to get? What are we going to get? And but we had off work this week this last couple of days because of some issues there. But we were able to get all that done, so we don't have to stalk people in the parking lot looking for a parking space at the mall. Yes. You go around and is he leaving? Is he leaving? Run down there, get that spot. Put your kids in the spot and lay their lives down. Stay right there. Don't let that car get down here. It's amazing how the Christmas cheer comes out in the parking lots of malls this time of year. People getting fights and everything else. Like, really? It's Christmas, right? But so Jacob and Esau. We see that this difference between them, when Esau comes back and he's tired from hunting all day long, and he's like saying he's going to die because he's so hungry. So he tells Jacob to make him some of that stew, and Jacob says, well, give me your birthright. And it's just really off the wall, really kind of statement for Jacob to say something like that, but he realized that Esau didn't care about it and didn't value it like he should have, and so he was, being kind of dramatic and saying that he needed to eat now, so he was willing to sell his birthright to Jacob and for a bowl of stew, and he probably didn't even think it really even meant anything, which is why he was willing to do that. So that's the mentality that we have between Jacob and Esau. Now Jacob shouldn't have done that, and so he's got his issues, and Esau should have never sold that to him, so he's got issues. But we see the difference between the two in that is that Jacob is more spiritually sensitive, Esau was more worldly minded. And you'll even see in the New Testament where it says that God hated Esau and loved Jacob. Okay? The point isn't that God hated Esau and that he didn't want anything to do with him. The point is that Esau did not care about the spiritual things of life. He was interested in the worldly things. Okay? So that we see here, and when we get into chapter 27, we see after Abraham dies, and then the thing with Isaac and Abimelech, we won't go into that right now, but that was a similar situation, that Abraham, when he went down into Egypt with Sarai, and the king of Egypt was, he was concerned that the king was going to try to kill him in order to take his wife. Well, the exact same thing happened with Isaac and this king named Abimelech. You can read that in chapter 26. Then in chapter 27, we see Jacob and Esau when Isaac is thinking he's going to die, and he's gone blind basically. He's gotten old, and he thinks he's going to die. When reality is he's not ready to die yet. He's going to live another 40, 50 years after this time. But he thinks he's at a point where he's going to die, and so he calls Esau in, who's his firstborn, to give him the blessing. Now, Isaac should have known by this point that Esau should not receive the blessing. Okay, because Esau had his mindset was not on the spiritual things. He had taken wives, that it says there at the end of chapter 26, and Esau was 40 years old when he took to wife Judith, the daughter of Beri the Hittite, and Bashemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. Those are pagan women. They don't believe in the God of the Jews, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac. And yet Esau didn't care. And not only did he not marry within his own belief system, but he also married two wives. Okay? So that should have given the warning to Isaac that, hey, Esau is not prepared in his mind and his heart to receive the blessing. Because the blessing comes with a double portion of the inheritance, as well as the spiritual responsibility of leading the family. He should in no way have been given that blessing. But for whatever reasons, Isaac was kind of blind to that, not just blind physically, but also blind to that. But Rebekah was not. Moms kind of they really watch their kids and they know what's going on with them. Okay? And Rebekah knew that Esau was in the world. He was worldly minded. And Jacob was more spiritually sensitive. So, as we often do, as Abraham did, as Isaac did, Rachel decided to take matters into her own hand. Okay? Now, God knew this was going to happen, obviously, and He allowed it to happen. But instead of trusting God to work things out, Rebekah devised a plan, okay, in order for Jacob to get the blessing. Okay, and I'm sure you probably read this before. If you have not, I'll just real quick summary in chapter 27, where Esau is there with his dad, Isaac, and Isaac tells Esau, go out and get some of that venison. Shoot a deer for me, and cook it up, that spicy, not really good venison I like, bring it to me, so I can eat it and bless you before I die. He thinks he's going to die. I guess because he had lost his eyesight. Again, he's not going to die for any time soon, but he thinks he's going to. So he wants to bless Esau. So Rebekah hears the conversation, and as Esau leaves to go out and go hunting, it's going to take him a while, obviously. She comes to Jacob and says, here's what you need to do. I want you to go get one of the goats. I'm going to cook it up just like your brother cooks up the venison for Dad. And I want you to, we're going to put the lamb skin on your hands and on your neck. And we're going to put his coat on you because it smells like the field. It smells earthy. And you're going to act as if you're Esau. And I'm sure Jacob was thinking, what? What? I can't do that. Dad's going to know who I am. And Rebekah just said, no, just do what I tell you. So, even though Jacob is accused of being the deceiver here, Mom is the one who told him to do it. And he was basically obeying his mother. Okay? And so, because Rebekah understood the importance of the blessing from Isaac and knew that Esau would profane it, basically, he already had by marrying 2 Hittite women, she set this up so that Jacob would receive the blessing. As you read through there, you'll see that when Jacob went to him, Isaac was like, wait, is this Esau, or is this sounds like Jacob? But he couldn't see. Obviously he was blind, fully blind, that he could not tell that it was Jacob. And after he felt the fur on his hands and the fur on his neck and smelt his clothing and he gave him the meat, he figured, okay, maybe I'm just getting old. I just can't tell between my 2 kids anymore. And he went, I call my kids all their different names. I'll call Reed Jack, and I'll call Ann Kate, and I do that all the time. Okay, so now he's physically blind. He's older, so he probably his senses aren't as attuned as they used to be. So he falls for it, and he gives the blessing to Jacob. Now you would think, in our modern thinking, you would think, well, that wasn't Esau, so I'm just going to take that back. Didn't work that way. Once the blessing was given, in their culture, in their society, a person's word was everything. Today, a person's word doesn't mean anything. Not even a court of law. I mean, you have verbal contracts and agreements and all that kind of stuff, but that doesn't even hold up in a court of law anymore. You better have something written down and signed 3 times and witnessed by 50 people, or it doesn't get. Back then, a person's word was as good as gold. And when you gave a blessing or you gave somebody your word, that was done. There's no taking it back. So when Isaac blessed Jacob with the blessing of the firstborn, he kept it, and it was his. And when Esau came and he figured out what happened, he was upset. Why was he upset? Because he wasn't going to get the double portion of blessing. He didn't care about the spiritual aspect of it. He wanted the money. He wanted the inheritance. And so that was his thinking. But he was upset. He said, Dad, but you got to give me a blessing. So Isaac blessed him, but in his blessing, you'll see there where he says, you're going to serve your brother. So indicating there that Isaac recognized that this happened, God allowed it to happen, and that, yes, Jacob, even though he's not the firstborn, would be the leader, would be the ruler. So that's what happens in Genesis 27. And then, obviously, Esau gets really mad, and he says, I'm going to kill my brother. Now, that's not like when your children get mad at each other and say, I'm going to kill you. They're talking about they're just going to punch him or something. He meant literally he's going to kill him because he was that mad. And so, knowing this, Rebekah hears his thoughts out loud about how he's going to kill his brother, literally, and decides that he needs to get out of town. So she goes to Isaac and says, "Look, these women that Esau have married are a grief to my mind. They're not of us. They don't believe the way we do. We need to send Jacob to go get a wife from our family, from the people that believe like we do," which is the same thing that Isaac himself did, through Abraham sending. We read all that before. So, in chapter 28, we see where Jacob is sent by mom and dad, with mom and dad's blessing, to go to Laban, which is Rebekah's brother, okay, which are the daughter and son of Isaac's uncle. Okay, and then he's going to go see Laban. This is the next generation. So he goes, and he says in verse 1 in chapter 28, and Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him and said unto him, Thou shalt not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. Arise and go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, thy mother's father, and take thee a wife from hence of the daughters of Laban, thy mother's brother. And God Almighty bless thee, and make thee fruitful, and multiply thee, that thou mayest be a multitude of people. Now, so what do we see here? We see here that Isaac has accepted what has happened. That the hand of God, even though Rebekah and Jacob were deceitful, but God has showed Isaac that Esau was the wrong person to be blessing. And so he's accepted it and blessed Jacob and sent him on his way to go get a wife from his own family. So he would, and this is a lesson for us to learn. In the New Testament, it tells us, be not unequally yoked together. What is that talking about? When you give advice to your children, or to somebody you know that's young, that's a Christian, and they ask about marriage and that kind of thing, one of the primary things a Christian has to avoid is marrying somebody that doesn't believe the way they do. Because it causes major problems. If you're a Christian and you marry, now if you got married and you weren't Christian, or you weren't taught or whatever, that's another thing. But if you're a Christian and you've grown up in a Christian home, or you're teaching your children as Christians, you ought to encourage and tell your children that you shouldn't marry somebody that's not a Christian the way you are. In the sense of believing the gospel, knowing Jesus Christ, and because it causes major problems for you later on in life. I mean, if somebody's Jewish and somebody's Christian, how are you going to raise your kids? That happens all the time. And then there's big fights about how they're going to raise their kids. Oh, we'll just let them do whatever they want and then become agnostic or atheist or some kind of other weird religion. Instead of both parents being together, united under one belief, that's a solid foundation for where your children will grow up and at least have a greater chance of acknowledging the truth of the gospel. It's never a guarantee, but there's a much greater possibility of them growing up Christian if both parents are solid Christians than if you have one that's one religion and one that's something else. Okay? That's why Paul said that in the New Testament. Be not unequally yoked together. What does he mean? You have two oxen that are pulling a plow. You got one that's really strong and one that's really weak. What's going to happen? He's going to go in a circle. They're just going to be going around and around. It's not going to work well. Your field is going to be a mess. If you unequally yoke together with a spouse, your family life is going to be a mess. Spiritually. You may be successful financially. You may have all kinds of blessings as far as the world's concerned. But spiritually, it's going to be a mess. Because one of you, the one who's an unbeliever, is going to have a hard time agreeing with the one that's a believer. Now, there are instances, many, where the one spouse gets saved and they both become Christians and they're going the right direction. But more often than not, it doesn't work out that way. It usually ends up in divorce or major problems in the family. So we see that here, even in the Old Testament, where they're talking about getting a wife. Going home and getting a wife from the family that agrees and believes the same way we do. That's an example there in the Old Testament of what Paul was talking about in the New Testament. Okay? And we see that in the New Testament. It says that the things that were written in the Old Testament were examples for us to follow today. So when Paul gives a commandment, usually there's an example of it in the Old Testament of why you should or should not do whatever it is he said. So there you have an example of that right there. So Jacob goes and he's traveling to go back to his roots to get a wife, just like his dad did. Or his dad didn't travel, but just like Abraham did for Isaac in sending out a servant. Now Jacob's going to actually go away. Now if he hadn't had this issue with Esau, he probably would have done the same thing Isaac did. But because Rebekah was trying to remove him, because Esau was going to kill him, she and Isaac sent him away to separate him from his brother. So they didn't have a little altercation there. And so it says there in verse 6, it says, when Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Paddan-aram to take him a wife from thence, and that as he had blessed him, gave him a charge, saying, thou shalt not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. And that Jacob obeyed his father and his mother, and was gone to Paddan-aram. And Esau, seeing that the daughters of Canaan pleased not Isaac his father, then went Esau unto Ishmael, and took unto the wives which he had Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael's, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebajoth, to be his wife. So Esau's trying to get the blessing back because he knew that mom and dad were upset that he married these Hittite women, so he's going to go to Ishmael and see if he can get a wife from there and maybe make his mom and dad happy. And all of this is just creating, when you create a mess and you try to fix it by creating more of a mess, because now he's got 3 wives. It just gets worse, and we need to do things right the first time. And when we mess up, we don't try to fix it by making more of a mess. You don't, two wrong. You ever heard the expression, 2 wrongs don't make a right? Well, this is what Esau is trying to do here. And so he's making that mess, and Jacob's on his way, and we see there in verse 10, and Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran. And he lighted upon a certain place and tarried there all night. And this is an important place I want you to see. Now, at this point, we don't know I don't remember reading anywhere where God specifically spoke to Jacob himself, personally. Now, God obviously spoke to Isaac several times. God spoke to Abraham quite a bit. But this will be the first time where we see that God speaks to Jacob in a dream. So let's read there. You've heard the term Jacob's ladder? That's where this comes from right here. It says, and he lay down in the place to sleep, verse 12, and he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set upon the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it, and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham thy father, and the God of Isaac. The land wherein thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed. So here we have confirmation again that the blessing that God blessed the world with through Abraham would go through Isaac, not Ishmael. And now we see it going through Jacob, not Esau. Okay? And he says there in verse 15, and behold, I am with thee, and will keep thee in all places whither thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land. For I will not leave thee until I have done that which I have spoken to thee of. What did Jesus say when he left? Go into all the world and preach the gospel unto every creature. And then at the end he says, wherever you go, I'll be with you. That's exactly the same thing that God is saying to Jacob here. Jacob is on an adventure to go find a wife, and he's going to go through a lot of things. But this personal encounter with Jesus, with God, is what gives him that spiritual strength to go through. You need to have personal encounters with God. It may not be in a dream like this with Jacob seeing a ladder, but it may be you get your rent reduced. Okay? It may be you get to work. Maybe not be on time, but you got there and you were able to do your job. Okay? It may be just something simple like that, but you prayed and you... My wife is constantly asking God, where did I put my keys? Lord, I gotta find my keys. Or, actually, that's me. Actually, she's constantly walking around, talking to the Lord and saying, Lord, I need this or I need that, and He constantly answers her. It's that personal experience, like we were saying earlier. Your Christian walk isn't something you do on Sunday. It's something you do all the time. And when it's all the time, when you experience something like this, you'll know where it comes from, and it'll be that much stronger for you in your life to know that God is there with you. In all your stupidity, and all of the dumb things that you do, or the situations you get into, or the problems that you have, and God helps you with it and gets you through it, you see God working. The problem with the world is, and the lost world is, they don't recognize God, and even when God does bless them, because He does bless lost people sometimes, and helps them to try to guide them to Him, they don't recognize Him. But as a Christian, we should never be guilty of not recognizing God for who He is and what's happening in our lives, and how He's guiding us through the hard times as well. And we'll see this in one of Jacob's sons, Joseph, in the next couple of weeks. We'll see that in that, even though it was about as bad as it could get for Joseph, he never complained to God about, why God are you doing this to me? We see where he was faithful. He just trusted God. He didn't understand why it was happening. He just trusted God. Okay? And that's what we need to do. And here, Jacob has that experience to give him the strength to trust God. So he has this experience. Now, there's an occurrence or a verse in John chapter 1. Look there real quick, where this same thing is said. Look in John chapter 1. John chapter 1, in your New Testament. And this is a confirmation of really what Jacob experienced. John chapter 1, look in verse 50. Jesus answered and said unto him, Because I said unto thee, I saw thee under the fig tree, believest thou? Thou shalt see greater things than these. And he saith unto him, Verily, verily, I say unto you, hereafter ye shall see heaven open, and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. That's the exact same thing that Jacob saw thousands of years before that. So this picture, this image, whatever it was that Jacob saw that's described to us as a ladder of angels is repeated again, and it actually says it's something we'll see in the future. Okay? So these things that happen in the Old Testament are directly related to things that are not only happened in the New Testament, but things that we may experience in the future, things that we may see. Okay? And so that validates what is happening here what happened here in the Old Testament. And it says in verse 16, And Jacob awaked out of his sleep, and he said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. And he was afraid and said, How dreadful is this place? Meaning, not dreadful, but awesome. That's the kind of word. This is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. And Jacob rose up early in the morning and took the stone that he had put for his pillows. Could you imagine? Ever complain about how hard your pillow is? Could you imagine using stones for pillows? Wow, you're talking about a neck ache when you got up in the morning. Okay. But it says he set them up for a pillar and poured oil upon the top of it. And he called the name of that place Bethel. Okay? But the name of the city used to be called Luz at the first. And Jacob vowed a vow, saying, If God will be with me, or since God is with me, I will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat, and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace. Then shall the Lord be my God. And this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house, and all that shall give me I will surely give the tenth unto thee. So, we see here that Jacob, having this really intense personal experience with God, has basically had his, I wouldn't say conversion, but has had his life-changing experience with God, in that now he knows God's with him, is going to take care of him. It's going to be very important over the next 20 years of his life, okay? Because of what he's about to go through in the next 20 years of his life. He gets there and he finds Laban and his family, and he comes and he tells them why he's there, and he says, I want to marry one of your daughters. And he says, I would really like to marry Rachel, because she is beautiful. She's hot. No, because she's really pretty. I really like Rachel. I don't think they use those kinds of words back then. I always tell my children, they ask how we met, and I turn the table. No. Ask how we met. And I said, yeah, my wife, when I first met my wife, I didn't think too highly of her, because she was the art director at PG Community College in the art department. And we were setting up for a photography show, and I was in a photography class. And she was very bossy, because she'd tell everybody where to put stuff up, and she just kind of had a bit of an attitude. She was like 20 years old back then. And I'm like, man, who's this person acting like this and whatnot? Because she was all stressed out trying to get everything hung up and all that. But I didn't know her and all this stuff, so my first impression wasn't all that great. But then my kids said, well, what changed your mind about her? I said, well, I went to the show, and she was all, put all the makeup on, had a nice thing on, and had a nice sweater, and the stretch pants and all that kind of stuff. She came up and put her arm around me and said, hey, how you doing? Just because that's how she was just being friendly with everybody. At that point, and the funny thing is, I had brought my best friend to set him up with her to that show. He ended up being the best man at my wedding to her. How that worked out, I don't know. But I said it had nothing to do with spirituality, guys. She was hot. I think that's how, I mean, you know, he didn't really know Rachel yet, so he just said, she's pretty, okay? And so he wanted to marry Rachel. But the custom was that the older daughter should be married first, okay? But he wanted to marry Rachel. So Laban, who wasn't the most honest guy in the world, he decided to trick him, okay? And some people say, well, that was God's retribution to Jacob for what he did to Esau. No, it has nothing to do with that, okay? It had to do with Laban being, he wanted his older daughter to be married because he didn't want her to go husbandless, okay? And she wasn't the pretty one or whatever, but she was the more spiritual of the two, okay? And she was, God blessed her. But we see, you read the story, we won't go through it all, where, you know, Jacob was willing to work for 7 years. Now, could you imagine, guys, when you met your wife, and you went to her dad and said, can I have your daughter's hand in marriage? He said, sure, after you worked for me, slave labor for 7 years. What would you have said? Don't answer that, Brian. Deacon Ernie, what would you have said? Don't answer that. 7 years of slave labor. That's what Jacob was willing to do to marry Rachel.
Never mind, no, thank you.
And he was willing to do it. He really loved Rachel. Okay? And so he did all that, worked for 7 years. I mean, my wife and I, we were engaged for about 1.5 years. 7 years, that's a long time. Okay? Now, nowadays, people get engaged a long time. And they just, because, you know, they don't have that same value system we had 20, 30 years ago. But it's one of those things where, you know, you see that he was really, really wanting to marry Rachel. And so the wedding day comes, and, you know, they have the ceremony, and you got to understand, back then, when they did all this, the veil, when, you know, you go to a wedding today, a lady wears a veil, it's just kind of really thin, you know who it is, it's obvious who it is. Back then, they full, like you see over in the Middle East, the full covering and everything. You couldn't tell who was underneath the back. And so he married Leah, thinking it was Rachel. That night, when they went to consummate the marriage, you know, he still didn't know who it was until the next morning. And when the veil came off, and he's like, Rachel, what happened to your face? You look just like Leah. Obviously, he realized he had been deceived. And so, we see this in, go over in chapter 29. Look there in verse 27, or 26. After this happened, it says, and Laban said, it must not be so done in our country. This is his excuse for why he did what he did, to give the younger before the firstborn. Then he said in verse 27, now this is a point where I got confused, and I thought, well, I didn't realize that until I read it again and a couple times before I realized what happened here. He says, fulfill her week, and we will give thee this also for the service which thou hast served with me yet 7 other years. And Jacob did so and fulfilled her week, and he gave him Rachel, his daughter, to wife also. He had 2 weddings within a week. So what? I always thought it was he married Rachel after 7 years, and then he had to work another 7 years. Excuse me, he married Leah after 7 years, and then he had to work another 7. No, he got Rachel immediately, so a week later. Okay, and so because of what Laban had done, bigamy, or not, yeah, bigamy. When you have more than one wife, bigamy, right? Yeah, they didn't. That wasn't an issue for them. So he gave him Leah, and then he gave him Rachel a week later, and then he would have to work those 7 years because of that's basically the payment that he would have to make for Rachel. So now he has 2 wives that he has to deal with, and he is willing now to work another 7 years for Laban to pay for Rachel. Okay, that sounds strange, doesn't it? To pay for Rachel. But if you'll notice there, it says later on in that chapter how we don't do this in our society today with the dowry and all that kind of stuff. Back then, that was a big deal.
Wow.
because that was an inheritance, the portion of inheritance that the women would receive from the father when the father died. Okay? And so, in a sense, and if you look in the Middle East today, this is still the way things are done. Arranged marriages. The father, it's not that the husband or the potential husband and wife get together and say, oh, we want to go mom and dad and tell them we're going to get married. It's, okay, you daughter, you're going to marry him. It's not often a choice. And it's still that way in places like India, Middle East, some places in Africa. That's a resulting, or that's the residual of that culture way back in the times that we're reading about here in the Bibles. And even in China, places like that, it's still a predominant thing where the parent, or basically the father, will tell the daughter who she's going to marry. Now that's foreign to our thinking. In America, even in the Philippines, in our societies where we're free to choose to do whatever we want. But I'm sure even some places in the Philippines, at least a while back, it used to be like that, not too long ago. Arranged marriages and stuff like that. So this is what we're dealing with here. So when it says purchased and bought, that's just the culture. They accepted that. That was the culture they were in. It wasn't like slavery per se, but it was just, that's the way they did things. Okay? But he loved Rachel, and he didn't hate Leah. He loved them both, but he loved Rachel more, because that's who he wanted to marry originally. So he goes on and he has children with Leah, and Rachel is barren, meaning she can't have children. He has 4 children with Leah. And if you'll notice, the last child that he has with Leah, down in verse 35, at least at this time, he actually ends up having 6 boys and a girl with Leah, Dinah. But in verse 35 it says, and she conceived again. Now remember, what tribe of the tribe of Israel did did Jesus come from? I just told you. Judah. Okay. Now, Jacob loved Rachel, wanted to marry her, but he ended up having to marry Leah first. Then he got Rachel. Look down in verse 35. This is talking about Leah. And she conceived again and bare a son, and she said, now will I praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah, and left bearing. So the lineage of Jesus Christ actually ended up going through Leah, not Rachel. Okay? And so you see how God will use the people. Rachel was probably less spiritually minded than Leah. And we see that later on where when they leave, that Rachel takes the idols that belong to her father and steals them and takes them with her. Not necessarily to worship them, but because they were symbols of the land they owned and kind of like having a written contract. That's kind of what they used back then. But so we see here where when God knows who the people are that are sensitive spiritually, and He's going to use them, and He'll allow circumstances to happen, and no matter what, God's plan, His will is going to be worked out. We look at the details and how it worked out, then how we say, well, this person lied, this person did this, but the end result is God's will worked the way He wanted it to. Okay? And we see this through both Leah and Rachel, in that they were both blessed. Esau and Jacob were both blessed. Okay? But Jacob had that position of being in the leadership. Leah had that honor of bringing Judah into the world, who would later be the descendant from which, the tribe from which Jesus would come. And then it says, and Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children, and she envied her sister, and said, remember Hannah? And we'll talk about Samuel later on. Well, a lot of similar things are happening that we read about in the Scriptures, and we see that how God intervenes, and God gives a personal experience into these persons' lives so that their faith would be strengthened. He says, give me children or else I die. That's what she says to Jacob. I like the answer. And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, am I in God's stead, who hath withheld from thee the fruit of thy womb? And she said, behold my maid Bilhah. Okay, now what happened is, Laban gave a handmaid unto both Rachel and to Leah, basically a female servant, a younger lady, so that in the event they could not physically bear children, their culture is that the handmaid would bear children in their place. But the children would still belong to either Leah or Rachel, even though the handmaid gave birth to them. Basically a surrogate mother. Okay? So that, because it was so, the value of giving birth as a woman, that was the highest value, and it still is today, honestly, if you think about it. There's no greater thing in this world, that a privilege that a woman has than to be able to have a child, or if you can't have children, to raise children. Okay? Because it is so, it's the most important thing you can do. People in our society, motherhood and being a mom and all that kind of stuff has been downplayed, unfortunately. Even fatherhood has been downplayed. But it is really the most important thing you can do in life, is to raise a child in the way he should go. And to nurture that. You're pouring your life into that child. As a woman, you're carrying that child for 9 months. And just the experience of that, you know, we men, we don't experience that. But, you know, talking to my wife, it's like, that's the most amazing thing that somebody can do. You know? And we see here in this culture how that, and we'll see that with Mary later on in the New Testament, how the women of their time were so excited about the fact that they could possibly be the one who would carry the Messiah into the world. Because it was that important. And so it was that important for her to have children that she was willing to give this other woman, her handmaid, Bilhah, to bear children unto Jacob. So he has children with her, 2 more, and then, here we go again. Leah gets jealous of Rachel, and she can't bear it. For whatever reason, God closed her womb temporarily, so she gives Jacob Zilpah. Now he's got 4 wives. Okay? And this guy's getting worn out. He's going here, bouncing all around. It's like, man, which tent am I sleeping in tonight? You know? It's like, yeah, but that's, and we think, in our thinking today, it's like, man, that's messed up. You know, he's all running around, sleeping around with all these. But they're all his wives legally, even though that's not how God designed it. How did God design it? 1 man, 1 woman, for life till death do you part. They're not doing it that way. Their culture has interfered with God's plan, but God is still going to use it for His good and His will. So they have, between the 4 women and Jacob, they give birth to the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay? Judah being the one through which Jesus Christ would come. So you read all that. We don't have time to read all that. And they also have 1 daughter. Her name is Dinah. Okay? And something happens there with her in one of the chapter 31 or 32. We won't read into that right now. But I want you to see something real quick. God allows Jacob to go through these things. Back home, where he came from, Esau is slowly getting over his anger towards his brother. It's now been 14 years. Okay? He hasn't seen his brother in 14 years. Isaac is still alive. He thought he was going to die. He's still alive. And he's wondering, you know, how things going with the son. Hadn't heard from him. Nobody knows what's going on. Jacob's now got, you know, at this point he's got, I think, 8 or 10 kids. And he's getting rich because he's got all these cattle and his sheep and stuff that God has blessed him with. And now he goes to Laban and he says, you know, what do I have to do in order to take some of the labor that I've labored for with me so I can go back to my home? He said, you work 6 more years and you can have the cattle that are ring-straked and striped and spotted. And so Jacob, being wise about how to deal with animals and all that, he takes them all out into the field. He lets them mate, do their things, and he knows the little tricks of the trade to get them to mate and who to put which ones with which. And ends up that the majority of the ones that are born are ring-straked, spotted, and have different colors, which would be his. Normally that doesn't happen because the cattle that belonged to Laban were solid. They were solid colors, and they would normally, if they mated with each other, they would produce a few ring-straked and striped ones, but mostly other solid, you know, offspring. Well, God worked it out to where God said, look there in verse, chapter 31. Let's see. Hold on. Yeah. There's so many chapters in this, I lost my spot. There it is, right there. It says in chapter 31, verse 10. And here's where Jacob explains why he did what he did. This is what I want you to see. And it came to pass at that time that the cattle conceived, that I lifted up mine eyes and saw in a dream, his second dream. And behold, the rams which leaped upon the cattle were ring-straight, speckled, and grizzled. And the angel of God spake unto me in a dream, saying, Jacob, and I said, Here am I. Now how long has this been? It's been almost 20 years now. Okay, because he worked 7 years for Rachel, 7 years for Leah, and 6 more years for the cattle. Excuse me. And God spake to him and told him to do this, so that as he left, he worked for Laban for many years for nothing. And God was blessing him with the abundance of the cattle and the stuff that would come as they conceived and gave birth. And he says there in verse 12, he said, Lift up now thine eyes and see all the rams which leap upon the cattle, ring straight, so on and so forth. Verse 13, I am the God of Bethel, where thou anointest the pillar, and where thou vowest a vow unto me. Now arise and get thee out from this land, and return unto the land of thy kindred. And Rachel answered and said unto him, Is there yet any portion or inheritance of us from our father's house? So, God blessed him. God told him to do this with the cattle, and God made it so that even though the cattle that were solid were conceiving, they came out ring straight, they came out speckled and grizzled. You say, what? I'm so confused, Pastor Brian. I don't know what you're talking about. Because it's time to be done. Here's the thing. God spoke to him, and God did a miracle. And all those cattle came out for Jacob's benefit. Okay? Jacob had another experience with God, personal experience. He prayed, and he saw it happen before his eyes. You pray about a financial problem you have, and you watch God take care of it. That's happened time and time again in my life. You pray about a physical need that you have, got an operation coming up, and you're praying, God, take care of it. A lot of people would say, well, the doctors did a good job. Boy, was she lucky. No, don't ever go down that road. God allowed those doctors to have the skills that they have to be able to do whatever they had to do, and God allowed your body to heal. And if your body doesn't heal the way it should, then for whatever reason, God allows that. It's all in God's hands. And when we have those personal experiences with God, you have that relationship, you talk to God daily. Like I said, my wife walks around talking to God all the time. Lord, I can't find this, or Lord, help me with this, or Lord, that's what it's. When it says in the New Testament, walk with God as children of God, that's what it's talking about. It doesn't say come to church on Sunday and then go home. It says walk with God every day, wherever you're at. He's right there with you. And when you acknowledge Him when you're blessed with things, or you acknowledge Him when you get out of a situation that seems hopeless, and Edwin can actually push the car out of the way by himself. Superpower strength. Normally he wouldn't have been able to do that. You say, praise God, thank you, Lord Jesus, for helping me to do this. And people might look at you like you're funny, but that doesn't matter. I don't care what people think about me. I care what God thinks. Yeah. And so when God blesses you, acknowledge that and take that into the house of your faith to make it stronger. So the next time, what do you think was happening with Jacob here? Where is he going? He's going back home to face who? Esau. What was Esau's attitude towards him the last time he saw him? I'm going to kill you, brother. Okay? So now he's going back there. He's got all his kids, his wives, his goats and cows and sheep and all this kind of stuff. He doesn't know. He hasn't talked to Esau in 20 years. He has no idea what Esau's attitude is going to be towards him. But he's had these experiences with God. God said on the way out, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to bless you. And it's hard, again, like I said, to see the time frames, the 20 years. Where were you 20 years ago? What were you thinking spiritually 20 years ago? How much have you grown in 20 years spiritually? How much have you grown in the last year spiritually? You think about Jacob here going through all the things he's gone through, and yet God here again shows himself, gives him this dream, and then lastly, just real quick, as he's heading back, I want you to see this in chapter 32. And this is where we need to see, this is where we need to understand God is working on our behalf. Last verse, and we'll be done. It says in verse 32, chapter 32, verse 1, and Jacob went on his way. Who met him?
Angels.
Have you ever read that verse before? And the angels of God met him. It doesn't say angel. The angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, this is God's host. And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. Basically, what he had was, he's going to go face Esau, who's got an army of people now, who he thinks is going to try to kill him. But what has Jacob got? He got God's angel armies with him. Knowing that and giving him that strength. And even though he's still in his worldly mindset, did things to try to appease Esau and sent out the droves of gifts to him before he got to him, he had that experience. Leaving, God talked to him, Jacob's ladder. Coming back, or getting ready to leave, God talked to him and said he was going to bless him with the cattle and give him the things that he needed. Now, he sees the angels of God as he's heading back. God's blessing was on Jacob, but Jacob was faithful because of the experiences that he had with God. That's what's going to make you strong in your faith, in your walk. I'm not here today because I'm super spiritual. I'm not here today because I'm better than anybody else as a Christian. I'm here today because I've experienced God in my life and the things that He's done. And it makes me solid in my faith to know that what I'm doing here actually is valid. Believing in Christ is the most important thing in life. Because I've experienced it. It's not just something I chose to do because it was the flavor I liked. I hate it when I hear parents say, oh, let's just let little Johnny choose what flavor he likes, what religion he likes. There's only one truth. And that truth is that Jesus is the Savior of the world. And this book is all about that. And although we're reading about a man about 3,000 years ago, we're seeing how this same Jesus that we worship, that we believe in, is the same Jesus that he worshiped and believed in and had personal experience with, which allowed him to go through some crazy stuff in his life and come through it blessed by God because he trusted God, because he had experience with God. Let me ask you this question and we're done. When's the last time you experienced God in your life? Probably a lot sooner than you think. Maybe you just didn't recognize it. You understand what I'm saying? Because God is with us all the time. Our problem isn't that God doesn't do things for us and doesn't bless us. Our problem is we don't see it. We don't recognize it. We don't acknowledge it, where it comes from. It's a lack of that gratitude and thanksgiving, which, we just celebrated Thanksgiving. When we have a thankful heart, we recognize where the blessings of God come from, and we walk with God daily. You'll be like Jacob. Even though you may have long periods of struggle and difficulties, you'll be able to go through those periods because you know God's there with you. And when you need Him most, He's going to show up. When your rent's about to go through the roof, He shows up and helps you. Gives you favor. We had the same experience, as I told you all a couple of years ago. we had to move. And instead, because our landlord was going to put the rent up like $200 a month more than what we were already paying, which we couldn't afford anyway. She ended up dropping it $200 a month. Similar situation. She wouldn't normally do that. Why did she do that? Because God gave us what we needed for a short amount of time to get to where we are now. Because we wouldn't have been able to do then what we were able to do now. So God enabled that. We give glory to God. Most people would say, well, that was fortunate, or that was lucky. It was God. Did y'all see the storm over in Israel? Did anybody see that video? There was a storm on the Israeli-Syrian border over in Israel. And it was a sand, rain, dust storm coming across the whole landscape. It stopped. This is on video. It stopped on the border of Israel and wouldn't go any further. How does that happen? It doesn't happen unless God does something. Do you think all those Israeli soldiers standing there videotaping were saying, wow, that was lucky? Then they may not be Christians, but they believe in God. And they know the history of God and the people, the countries around them trying to destroy them, which is still more true today than ever so. And the Syrians would love to wipe out the Israelis, and the ISIS would love to wipe out the Israelis. And that storm came, sat right on where all those ISIS people are, and would not cross the Israeli border. It's on video. It's like, wow. But people will look at that and say, oh, it must have been some kind of freak phenomenon. Yeah, it's called God doing a miracle right in front of people's eyes, and they won't even recognize what it is. It's on video. Go ahead and look it up. It's pretty wild. Israel is God's people, chosen people, as far as His plan for the world. And He's going to show that. But the world won't recognize that because they don't have that experience with God. But if you have the experience with God in your personal life, when you see that kind of stuff, you'll say, wow. One last story, I'm done. Did I tell you about the rainbow in Maine? Did I tell you about that one before? We went to Maine on deputation, raising our money to go to the Philippines. And I tried to multitask. We like to vacation in Maine because we have friends that live up there, right in the middle of the coast. So we rented the cabin in Belfast, Maine. I made an appointment for a church that was 2 hours north of there and a church that was 2 hours south of there. One was for a Wednesday night, one was for a Thursday night. So we got all our vacationing stuff together. We were going to go down and see some sights and then change into our clothes and go to the church on the Wednesday night meeting. Got down to that church, got to the church door, it was locked. There was nobody there. I guess maybe they forgot. I called the pastor, he says, yeah, we got a meeting with you tomorrow night. Oh no! I was supposed to be at the other church that was 4 hours north of where I was. Now, as a traveling missionary who's trying to raise support, that's not a good thing. I was kicking my, you ever do something stupid, you can kick yourself, you're like, oh, that was so dumb. So I was all mad at myself, driving back to the house and all that, and we're driving down the road, and there is a rainbow sitting right on top of the water, couldn't have been 100 yards out. That was the brightest rainbow I've ever seen in my life. And I knew, I can't explain to you how, God put that there for me to say, chill out, Brian, I got it. Yeah. Relax, I'm with you. So you made a mistake. Just relax. And we still had our meetings, we still got to go, raise our support and all that kind of stuff. So those little experiences, if you recognize where they come from, will strengthen your faith. If you acknowledge the one who blesses you. As Jacob had those experiences, it allowed him to do bigger and bigger things. And be able to get through what he had to go through. Amen?